Your ears do not deceive you. You have just entered the Cryptid Creator Corner brought to you by your friends at Comic Book Yeti. So without further ado, let's get on to the interview.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Cryptid Creator Corner. I'm Byron O'Neill, your host for our Comics Creator Chat. I'm excited about today's show because I get to talk about Adventureman, one of my favorite ongoing series in a time when the ongoing creator-owned series is becoming, unfortunately, increasingly rare. So I have the dynamic Defenders duo of Matt Fraction and Terry Dodson hanging out with me today to discuss their latest installment of the epic pulp adventure series with a new story arc, Family Tree, featuring 3 unique standalone stories, including luchadores, some French-inspired savate martial arts stuff going on, and a teenage romance to boot. So, Matt and Terry, welcome to the show. It's great to see you both.
Hey, Byron, thanks for having us.
Of course. Well, Matt, this is the first time we've met, so let me take the opportunity to thank you because you've managed to help me do something every father aspires to do. That's to look cool in front of his teenager. Like, usually, whoever I'm chatting with on the podcast goes fairly unnoticed, but I mentioned you being the co-creator of Monarch Legacy of Monsters, and that was, quote, not mid, which I think means something good in the parlance of the youth. So, thank you.
All right, I'll take it. Great. Right on. Thank you very much. My Godzillas are all out of reach. I used to. Oh wait, I got a little Godzilla.
Very nice.
He's apologizing. There's a podium and a little microphone, and he's apologizing for there was a run of these that they made in little machines in Japan. So my little apologizing Godzilla
Nice.
bowing. He's very sorry.
I used to have one when I was on the road that was a butane Godzilla lighter. So it was amazing. You flick his tail and, that one was a crowd pleaser for sure. But it was like really the first big monster series he's ever gotten into. And that cascaded throughout the fall. We did our horror movie watch, in October, and he's never wanted to. So it got him into Aliens, and we got to jump into all this cool stuff. So
That's good stuff.
Awesome.
yeah.
Awesome.
Well, jumping into Adventureman, I love the book. It's one of the most flushed out worlds in the comics medium today for me. It's beautiful with this totally unique aesthetic that marries Art Deco with a bit of a steampunk flair. And it's all threaded with this compelling superhero narrative that's surrounded by a group of sisters and their family with a classic pulpy Doc Savage overlay. To me, bloody brilliant. I constantly get lost in the pages. One of the most compelling components for me is the city itself, New York. Most of the time, a topographical setting is a stage where characters sort of interact. It doesn't it exerts a force on them, but it isn't in them. It isn't of them the way it is here. It's an important to this story as big Gotham is to Batman. So what was so compelling about New York as a setting to you both starting this whole thing off?
Boy, I mean, I think it's maybe outside of Washington D.C. or Colonial Williamsburg, one of the only cities in America where you can really still see history.
Yeah.
Where you're at France's Tavern or pick whatever the latest, a One World Trade, right? And it's a magical, beautiful city. Full of the kind of history that we were going to be playing with and looking at, and it just felt it felt right as a home base for both of us, I think, and to give Terry a diegetic reason to do the architecture studies, and Terry's done. You can talk about this more like research walks and going around and photographing things and building the geography of the place was big. And and it's the kind of place where you can walk by a 30-story building every day for 5 years and never actually see it, and then one day you look up and you see it, and it's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. It's a special place.
Oh yeah, it's magical. As I've been all around the world working with bands and stuff, and there's something about what America is. It's the most ancient city we have, right? There's places like Prague, and they have this mystique. And I remember very clearly walking out of Radio City one night after doing a river dance show, and to a fresh like undisturbed snow-lined street, and it's one of the coolest, most visual moments of my life. And I've been a professional landscape photographer for a decade, so it is a special place for sure.
Yeah. I mean, architecture. I'm a giant fan of architecture, and so going to New York was always a treat. And yeah, especially seeing it that first or second time I went, where I couldn't help but not have my head up in the air the whole time walking around.
Yeah,
Um, and so to have a chance to really have it be like the main character, one of the main characters of this story, was something I could pass up and wind and to play with that and explore it more and then add and subtract to it as well as we do with the story, where we get to change little bits here and there. But really a chance to just to explore it and draw it. Really, I love it. I love so much of the architecture in it and so much of the parts of the city, and for the story specifically, the sense of scale you get for these big action scenes and characters to
sure.
play off against is I think of Adventureman, the main character, a lot like the Chrysler building in itself, this big, giant architectural specimen. That's kind of what he is too. So I think the city is that that built on stone, that hard, tough city, and that's a pretty good example of what he is, I think. So it's a perfect backdrop to set him and that team off against.
So all of the scroll work that's included that you're doing there, back when we lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma, my wife was in grad school, and I mean, Tulsa's not the first thing that comes to mind when most people think of Art Deco, but there was actually a ton of it there in the 20s and 30s because of all of the oil money. You had this infusion of geometric opulence that just happened to get flushed into the town, and it's now part of the DNA. So, how did you come up with some of that stuff? Because it's very, very intricate all over the page in terms of, gutters and backgrounds and that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, there's, I think in my teenage years, I actually was a fan of Art Deco, so I really studied it a lot back then. And then I did some work that was it was more Art Nouveau inspired artwork, and so
Yeah.
coming back to New York, this next time, really seeing no understanding that much more art history, I guess, architecture
Yeah.
history between all those different styles, I could really appreciate the Art Deco, and really see what they were trying to do and why it worked. So I think that extra knowledge I had coming back to it this time really helped. And then all of a sudden, not, I could, it was cool before, but now I could really appreciate why it was cool. And I liked it more. I like it more now than I ever did.
Yeah.
And a chance to play on those ideas of what makes Art Deco what it is. Those shapes working like they do. And there's a real good sense of depth in that stuff. So as an artist, you're always looking for tricks. You're always overlaying things on top of something else to create depth. And with Deco, it's just built in. Plus, it has those harder edges that really make it a lot easier to provide depth with. Like these rules that your eyes kind of adapt to understand how far back something is or how deep something is, and Art Deco just excels at that. And then with the scale of New York, you're just pushing that higher and higher, so you're overlapping. And as an artist, it's a really good way to cheat life and depth in your work,
Yeah.
and then that would be a beautiful art form as well.
Well, that era, kind of the 20s through the 40s, had so much swag to it too. You have the tailored suits, the hats, the
Yeah,
cars, hell, even the guns
yeah,
had so much. I mean, just architecture and style and talent, and it really is probably the most classic version of America. When you start thinking about America, that is what typically people will think.
yeah.
And I know if it were me, I'd have this sort of gigantic mood board full of printed photographs, covering the walls for inspiration. But how did you both kind of use all of that material culture and sort of try to condense it and then create a hybrid mixed with modern? Because we're jumping back and forth a lot in the story.
Yeah, and part of the story is as Claire remembers what it means to be Adventure Man, more of Adventure Man's world kind of breaks into ours. So we knew we were going to be kind of colliding the salty and the sweet
Okay.
visually. you know. Well, having our own kind of fondnesses and predilections for certain styles or things, and once we got underway, it became part of the research, and there's some jet skis coming up in an issue, and I found the first jet ski, the first prototype jet ski, and it very much has a kind of mid-century kind of flair to it. I don't know that it was deliberately designed. It just was sort of the shape it had to be to work. But as a result, it has a kind of swoop of like a Cadillac hood ornament or something, like a Pontiac, kind of thing. So it just become we'll just send things. We'll find things and send them back and forth to one another. Oh, look at this. Oh, look at
Gotcha.
this. Uh, you know.
Are you car
It's
guys, or are either of you car guys? Because there was some of the designs look like a Chrysler Airflow from the 1930s.
Yeah, and I like cars, especially when you go back to that era where they really could do anything. I mean, it's like you're saying. I think the architecture and everything else, it is a peak of style, um, like the peak of American style, I guess. Where with the clothing, the cars, the buildings, everything was designed to this X degree. And then in the 50s, everything went modern. Everything got stripped down, put away. So we were at this peak of this lush kind of of style, and it's reflected in the cars. And I mean, you can follow that from anything, see how we go away from that. And for me, I think something that really helped, that was useful for me to help kind of dissect all the information I was finding as far as design and reference, was the art of the time. I'm more influenced by illustration and painting at that time, and that that informed my decisions on design way more than uh, actual photos of buildings or of photos of people or cars. It was actually what the artists were doing. So the colors and the way they were designing even compositions, that was way more important to me than finding what an issue of a Pulp Heroes or whatever looked like. It was researching the real world, and then the art of the time, because that stuff is just such gorgeous artwork. And they distilled those things down. They picked the best things and distilled it down for you and simplified it down. So, I pull from that more than anything else.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Is the PS to make the world look like what we wish it looked
yeah,
like?
yeah,
You know.
exactly. Like the peak and the prettiest version of all those things, the X degree. And then the great thing is that, again, as Matt said, we knew all along that the story was two stories, and those
Yeah.
stories are combining. And so the whole time, that's in the background, that you set this one thing against the other thing, this the sweet versus the salty, whatever. And we knew that was coming. So it wasn't having it come up later on and be more of a shock would have informed those decisions a lot differently. But knowing we were heading that direction informed how I really pushed one thing one way, and the modern look the other direction, because I knew what those were going to look like combined as well. So I was really designing like three things at once when I was designing that stuff, which was a lot of work, but it's so rewarding. No, when you kind of get to where you're going and find those points that you're heading for, and have those signposts that you're approaching. You're like, okay, this is where I'm going. It's gonna take a lot of work, but at least I know that it's kind of worth it. And I
Oh
believe
yeah,
that
yeah.
each one of these things are pretty enough or interesting enough that I want to keep drawing them.
Okay. So
Yeah.
are you a Mark Chagall fan? Because I had to ask, given that you have a character in the book that's
I like
Yeah,
Chagall a lot.
yeah. That's actually my sister-in-law's family name is also Chagall. A
okay.
couple layers back, and so that always is stuck in my head too. And plus, the artist is amazing. So
Yeah. Matt, I think you grew up in Chicago, is that correct?
We were born there, yeah. We moved around a lot, but I was born in Chicago.
Okay, yeah, yeah. There's a lot of Chagall. I think a lot of the stained
Yeah.
glass is there in Chicago.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think Chicago is another city that has that effect of, and I've not, it's changed a lot in like the last 20 years, and I was last there, I last lived there in the late 90s, and the last time I went, so much of it is unrecognizable. Like so much of the city has changed in the last couple of 20, 30 years now. But another place where there is this old world of beauty hiding around every corner,
Yeah.
less now than perhaps it used to be, but yeah, no disrespect to my hometown.
Yeah, my son and my wife are headed up that way, I think in 2 weeks for college visit stuff, and I'm gonna definitely send him to the history museum 'cause, I'm a
Yeah.
big Patterson fan, so seeing the Lions of Tsavo, it was one of those things when we were on tour, I always tried to make sure time to carve out to go see the Natural History Museum there, so
Yeah, yeah, and I went to Columbia, which is just, a few blocks down from the art museum with the
yeah.
lions, and
Yeah.
like just walking by that every day was awesome. I went to go see this Paul Mooney movie, I'm a Fugitive from the Chain Gang, which is one of my like favorites. I think it was Urban Leroy, like 1938 or something like that. But there's a scene in they were showing it at the museum for some reason, and there's a scene in the film where Paul Mooney comes out of the art museum of Chicago and goes past the lions, the building we were all sitting in. You know what I mean? It was this
Yeah,
weird
that's strange.
kind of magical moment, and the whole audience was like, "Oh, that's outside." Yeah, like I just there's so much of America is new build. It's nice when you can build a world in a comic that takes advantage of what we used to what we used to be capable
Right.
of, or at least willing to do in this country.
It's
Yeah, I
cool that
mean
I'd say it's cool that there's prime pieces of like Art Deco all throughout the Midwest, and some of my favorite pieces I actually use for reference for this book actually come from like Detroit or from Kansas City
Right. Yeah, Detroit's
or
another.
or
Yeah.
Minneapolis. And there'll be like there's like one or two like peak pieces in each one of those Midwest cities that are just these, they have a little bit more sculpture to them than maybe the New York pieces do, just because it's a different city. But it's really cool to pull those pieces in because they're just like the peak of they did the same thing that I'm doing basically. It's just taking the best of all these things that they liked and they kind of made their own version for their own city. And it's these one or two that survive in each one. So those particular ones. I'm always amazed to go, oh, this is in Nebraska or something with this one piece was like, wow, okay, great.
There's like Mutual of Omaha
Yeah.
building,
Yeah.
which is like literally just standing in the middle of
Right.
flat
Yeah.
nothingness.
Yeah,
Oh my
exactly.
God, that's great.
yeah, it's wild. The Oklahoma Natural Gas Building
Mhm.
is an Art Deco building, and I think cities, in ways, the backdrop of them, the skylines, become their own gallery. I guess it's probably somebody who has worked for a long time in in like two-dimensional art you put on a wall and as a photographer, but it always strikes me that way. And when you have these cities where there's just not as much hanging in the gallery, if you will, unlike, say, New York or Chicago, then you're just gonna be locked in and drawn to that thing as this unique piece that just happens to be there,
Right.
so
Right.
well, Terry, you were kind enough to send me the first issue of Family Tree. I was admittedly a little curious how you're going to maintain and infuse the Art Deco movement into a more globalized interpretation. Like France is not going to be a problem, but
Yeah, yeah. The French have it taken care of.
right, yeah, France is good, check mark. But I thought Mexico might be more of an issue until I went back and did some research, and there's certainly a
Right.
footprint there,
I
although
know.
I
Yeah.
guess
Yeah.
less so. But
Right. Right.
especially at the beginning, there's some just gorgeous visual elements taking for me, as somebody who has that background in anthropology and studied Central and South American cultures, there's a Mayan temple sort of
Right.
motif that was
Right.
kind of added into the buildings.
Yeah,
So
I think it's if it's I think it's Aztec. It's what I could be wrong. It's one or the other because we thought it was one, and I have friends in Mexico City, so I wanted it to be the right version. So whatever one I end up using is the correct one. So I had to make sure because it's slightly different. The Mayan is slightly different than the Aztec. So I went farther in the one direction. But that was nice to know. Doing research like that and finding those things out, and then looking, and then digging, and all of a sudden there it is. I find these things, and then obviously I've been working with the deco stuff so long that it's not hard to go, oh, I infuse this into this, and there's already the hard edges in that design stuff, and then to take it to the next stage is to go, now the colors, the Mexican colors that you're seeing are more of these colors than what you'll see in New York, and also
Yeah.
it just that echoes into the reader's mind they're somewhere else, and those colors should feel like a warm Mexican evening or whatever, as opposed to a scary night in New York, you know.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I worked in TV and coming from the world of photography as a professional, it's hard to overlook the color lays in this book, which I tend to think is LUTs or a filter. So when you're doing these color grading inspirations, talking about taking some of the warmth of Mexico, and how did you come up with New York? Because that green sort of avocado, I bought a house in the '90s, which was still stuck in the '70s, and there was a bathroom that was done completely in this sort of avocado green, and that for whatever reason, I sort of locked onto that in the book, and I never was, even when we renovated, I was not able to get rid of that was the one room I left that had a sink and the tile and the toilet, everything was this
Right.
avocado green, so
I think I mean, I'm seeing it in other pop culture stuff. If it's animation or movies or paintings, like I was saying, I will see something uh, um, done somewhere else. I go, oh, that's a good idea. That does feel like that space, and I just kind of like lock it back in my head. And also, it's also a lot of it's as simple as just knowing what else is happening in that particular issue. That whatever, by putting a yellow next to a purple or whatever in that issue, I know that the scenes are going to feel completely different. So
yeah.
just keeping that overall feeling in mind, knowing that I knew that it'd be mostly Mexico and France and New York, and so it's like the French feel will be this, the Mexico feel will be this, and then I already have New York set. Though no, so now we have two New Yorks going on at the same time. So each one of those New Yorks has their own palette, which
Yeah.
is good. And it actually speeds up coloring once I've made that decision.
It always looks like that kind of Mosser class green to me. It reads that kind of uh there's something deco about that particular
Yeah,
green. There's something,
Yeah.
or maybe, well, I'm not quite sure, but that's a very specific kind of. It looks great with gold. It looks great with
right.
copper. You know, it's yeah, and when I can, it's one of those things where I'll write something like, oh, it's ghost lights, it's spooky ghost colors. I don't know what that is. I can't write that, but Terry can. Terry can, and then do it in such a way that doesn't just feel like suddenly everything's got a weird orange light on it. You know what I mean? Like it builds organically into the world as we know it, but you can tell something different has happened here, and it's the thing. You mentioned Defenders, and we worked together before that on X-Men, and both of those opportunities made us realize we'd really like to do a book that didn't have to come out every 30 days, that we could take our time with and build out like we wanted to, and like just as a fan of Terry and Rachel, it's always my mission every issue to write like what's the ultimate Dodson's book
Yeah.
that I want to see, and it's just sort of play what if with what do I want to see, and then Terry just tops himself month after month after month, and it's astonishing, and I thought that this first issue of Family Tree was my favorite, and now I'm seeing the pencils for the next one. I'm like, no, that's gonna be my favorite. Right now, this one's my favorite. The next one, I wish we could share it, but like we've been we're finally like ticking off all these boxes of different kind of places we wanted to go and genres and vibes we wanted to touch on, and part of the joy of this arc is just doing that. Like, yeah, no, it's Mexican wrestling, but it's also this, and it's this, and it's this,
Yeah.
and the next one's got a lot of airplane stuff in it with Sally Sweet and her kind of origin story, and getting to see Terry do dog fighting is fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
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 Woo, in the snow, dog fighting in the snow. Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait.
What?
It's gonna be great.
That is bizarre. Okay, okay. I guess we'll all have to wait for that. Where did this savate come from in anyway? I have back when I was doing Chinese boxing, it was part of the curriculum, but everything that we did was, I guess, the street style, so it was all breaks and it was not tournament in any way.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I mean, we'd written her as Mademoiselle Chagall, so she was clearly French, and the idea of there being a kind of counter, that Adventureman has this kind of crew of 7 different
yeah.
archetypes, and the idea of, I guess it came a little bit out of the Iron Fist book that me and Ed Brubaker and David Aja did, where wanting to have this kind of yeah, like a society of fighters from around the world with different disciplines, and the idea of kind of a house marriage between two different fighting styles from two different cultures or whatever. It was, and also like, oh yeah, no, it's the French art of kicking, and sailors made it up.
Right.
Great, I love
Okay.
it. Great.
Yes.
Give me French sailors kicking each other. Fantastic. And the idea, it just was a chance to grow the international kind of it's a like, it's not a book that is like, it's aiming for accurate pop culture representation, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Sort of like what everyone contributed to this global idiom that we're working under, the kind of pulp adventure thing, and, like, it felt like, "Oh, right, if it wouldn't necessarily I wouldn't believe that there were kung fu fighters in France. Surely there are." But, like, no, what would the French version of that be? Sabat. Great, great. And just to set a scene, I think it's like one panel on a French gal on a frigate, on a French boat of French sailors kicking each other. And it just makes me so happy. Just like
Yes.
the high
Yes.
pants and
Yeah.
it's just
Yep.
great. Yeah. And then we get to do some luchadores stuff, and it's like I love it. It's the
Yeah.
best.
No,
So
it's hard to get bored on the book because
Yes. Yeah.
you're always
Yeah.
bouncing around, and it's I like researching and figuring things out and exploring and adding to the world. So it's as a like design exercise or whatever. It's a blast. It's
yeah.
it's always growing and changing. So it's hard to be complacent and get bored with doing something. So and then it's cool that we do come back to things too. So I make sure I put the time and effort into whatever I come up with. Um, but knowing that a lot of times it shows back up again. And in a different form,
Yeah.
so
Like no one
there needs to be something recognizable about it, even if we do it years later or years before.
yeah, like no one's just a waitress in the book. Everybody's got to, where in my head, even if I'm just writing a waitress or whatever, the life Terry will infuse that character with informs everything. And suddenly, there's a bit with two patrol officers in the first book, two cops, and they see Claire go by, and it was fine. It was just they were supposed to be cops, and like, oh, and that was how kind of tie in that she used to be a police officer or whatever. But the way Terry drew them, like I know everything about them. I knew who these guys were. I knew what their story was. I know what that car smells like. I know what their banter is. I know what their history is. And now one day we'll get back to them. And suddenly these guys are going to come out. We're going to discover what importance they had to Claire's life and Claire's story. And at the time, I just needed cops clocking, well, there goes Claire or whatever. And Terry gives this gift of like, no, no, these are two guys. And I get it. So that early on just kind of was informative for me of like, oh yeah, no, all of these pieces, like as a writer, I am writing myself checks and post dating them. And I know one day I'm gonna need, oh no, I need a guy on a boat who can come in and save the day, who's gonna we've got it. The French sailors
Right.
come in and they kick a bunch of dudes, and then you get, French sailors kicking ninjas. Who doesn't want to see that?
Yeah. It's hard to escape for me as somebody who looks at things through an anthropological lens constantly. Because I've been on a few dig sites myself over the years. I'm weirdly constantly aware that we're all walking over the dead. That a light
Sure. Yeah, no, it's all haunted. Yeah, it's all cursed burial ground, all of it.
and so life is layered, and we live that, and we're on top of that, and it builds. So in terms of character development, the sisters are all experiencing these past life archetypal memories or echoes. So Matt, what was compelling the most about putting that as the sort of the central nugget to thread all this great kinetic cool architecture, wonderful style, all this stuff, that beautiful stuff that Terry's doing. But I mean, this is the real meat of the book right here.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it I had some I was doing, you know, luchadore stories, and is this appropriative? Like how like I want it like it's not a
Right.
joke. Like I'm not doing it as a thing, but also I realized like, well, no, it's really about the pop culture assimilation. So it's really sort of more about like Santo movies and that kind of era of like Mexican cinema and all that kind of stuff. And like, oh, okay, great, right. That's what I'm honoring and looking at is the stuff that sort of was, Terry and I'll talk about. I talk about it. My favorite metaphors. The book feels like doing
Yeah.
this. Oh, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this. There's something similar in the writing wherever we go, where it's like, like I want to honor and respect the pop culture of cultures, and honor that and play with that and yes and that and you know that sort of came that first issue where there's the big first family dinner night of like, oh, all these kids, they were all adopted, and they were all adopted by, I've friends with adopted kids, and they make uh uh the culture of their children a part of their family's culture, even if they aren't biologically or genetically whatever tied to those places. And so that idea of like, oh, it's a family dinner night with a family made up of 7 different cultural influences, and like, whoa, man, what an amazing spread that's going to be. To get challah and chicken masala uh, on one table, and that kind of idea of all of the products of all of these different people around the world are a part of what makes and informs the book visually and tonally and fictionally and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I'm thinking here and absorbing here because I had this. It was weird. Upon the read, when I went back and reread everything this past weekend, I had what I will sort of describe as this sort of Jungian moment, um, where the interactions between Claire and her son Tommy. So I have a teenager, and it was this unsettling experience to see, my child going through these adult fears and how that echoes in your own life, which I'm not so much of a fan of.
How old of a teenager?
He's 17, so it's the
I got a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old, almost 15.
yeah, it's that whole dad launch thing, and then I don't know, the book just really connected with me personally in that way, and I know everybody's experience of, and that's the cool thing I think about comic books is and art in general, but I think comic books are special in that way is when people go in and there's what you breathe into life and intended to breathe into life, and then there's somebody's interpretation of it. So
Yeah, the root of this was wanting, I'd done a bunch of kind of grown up comics and wanted to do something that my kids could read.
yeah,
Well, and we'd been working on this long enough at this point that like it was like the start was, oh, this is like Wonder Woman for my daughter, and I write about a mom who discovers she's actually a superhero or whatever. Um, uh, uh, and yeah, and the root of that book is Claire and Tommy in so many ways, it's a single mother and her kid and raising. Yeah. So yeah, that cool. Awesome. It clearly comes out in the writing, and it's been happening so long that like the anxieties become older, you know? My son, said, "What the butts?" And it was the most 7-year-old thing a 7-year-old could say, and it was so great, and it came in, and now he's 17. The language is a little harder now, but, like, that sort of what can it informs the storytelling, and the sort of anxiety over being a parent in this world that's ultimately out of your control, right?
yeah,
Um, um, and yeah, and that's through the end of, uh, uh, Ghost Lights, and into Family Tree and beyond is sort of, Tommy's gone, Claire's not doing well. And so that's our kind of big, we have our kind of Empire Strikes Back downbeat moment at the end of Ghost Lights. And, we're gonna, as we're getting Tommy and Mom back together again is fuels the next 3 books easily,
Right. Yeah, really a story
and
of the it's a story of the. I mean, it's Claire is the adventure man, but it's it's Tommy that knew what was going on and informed everything, and their knowledge of the world is because he knew the books, and so they are the central story.
Yeah. I mean, it's like it would be like if an adult discovered that Pokemon was real, and their kid, who was the Pokemon expert, suddenly went away, and like, oh no, the walking Pokemon encyclopedia is gone. What are we gonna do? So it's fun now to backfoot everybody as they're trying to learn what all this means. Like, God, I wish Tommy was here. I could just ask him. And now I have to read 300 books or whatever. And they keep finding that there's more books. They thought there was a set amount, but as the old world starts coming back, they keep finding more Adventureman books. Like, there's only supposed to be 182, and now they're up to like 230 or whatever.
It's a great device having this series of books that the story that we're looking at is actually part from this one novel, and you don't realize that, and then the characters are realizing that what's going on is actually from this book, and how it's the same but not the same, because now we're in the 21st century as well. But that's a pretty cool device, I guess, to play with, to have.
And in my notebook, I actually have a list of the Adventureman books. Like, whenever a new title occurs to me, so I'm keeping this long list. Whenever we mention one in the series, I got to put it in and make sure it fits and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it feels very
So I have this
Hardy
crazy
Boys
list of,
to me.
yeah, yeah, sure, right. A little Hardy Boys. I know, Doc Savage.
Sure.
Any of the pulp, like all those novels had amazing titles.
Yeah.
Yeah, any kind of serial, anything, even the old Republic serials and stuff like that.
Well, tonally, there was a point in the book where it became more than it was for me in chapter 11, where the sisters come in to save Claire. And it felt like an Avengers Assemble moment, kind of the building of the team dynamic and their archetypal echoes were fully realized, which kind of functions ultimately to transition into the newer arc. Just for comparison, I felt like up until that point, I was getting a solo X-Men story, and then boom, giant size X-Men happens, and then they have solo books of their own. Is that sort of an apt illustration of where we're headed?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Getting the sisters to drink the juice kept getting pushed, down the line, and yeah, no, it's a big part of it. And like, some of them haven't, right? So some of them are like refusing to drink the super serum. Doesn't make them any less connected to the adventures, but they don't have the kind of jazzed up powers, quote unquote, that their others do. And that's fun, right? It keeps it, now there's 7 bulletproof people. Like, nope, it doesn't work like that, right? It's some of us are just doing the right thing and trying to help our sister. Others are now dealing with the ghost of pulp heroes and uncontrolled access to memories, and the idea of like ancestral memory was always like my favorite part about Black Panther. That like, oh, I can remember all the other Black Panthers. Like, oh, that's so great. So there's millions of Black Panther stories you've not heard, or like discovering you're a legacy character. It was Iron Fist thing of like, there's an old issue where there was an Iron Fist uniform hanging in Kunlun in some flashback, and Ed Brubaker like never forgot it. Like, oh, that meant there was an Iron Fist before him, and getting to do that story, like, just, I love that legacy stories and how to grow them and build the world by building backwards is pretty cool.
So you've been working on this for over a decade, and I'm sort of curious if the narrative has morphed for you. You talked about your son way back when, what the butts, right? So, and I find it's a really refreshing book, because in our country right now, where we're kind of being forcibly more anglicized, and it's refreshingly rife with diversity, which I'm so happy to hear a little bit of the background there about how you wrote it more for your kids as something they can read, because it feels very current in that way.
Yeah. And I don't dislike anything it's not like I was like, oh, I have to stop writing books about sex and drugs or whatever.
Sure.
But it was just a muscle I hadn't really flexed, and a chance to build into this world, however, and to be completely unencumbered by any continuity, you can just make it up. Like, oh, well, great, we'll do this, we'll do that. Was just, it's catnip. It's the perfect book for somebody with like ADHD,
Yeah, and the same for me. I mean, that the chance to draw such a diverse cast for me is a blast. I mean, I couldn't be happier drawing a variety of things. Not the more things per page so much, but the more different things I get to draw on a page is very interesting. As many different type of people or things as possible. It just keeps me interested, and exploring and figuring things out. And how do I make this work? Or how do I draw this person or whatever? I love that. I would be so bored if this cast was just all related sisters. I mean, purely related sisters. I think that was a big push, was to make sure we did that, because it just makes it so much more interesting for me. I've always enjoyed that kind of thing with the drawing I do. Is diversity in the characters, but like even like in sizes and shapes and hair colors, hair length, whatever, interests
And so
and
much,
stuff.
yeah, but so much of like the characters changed, like or like when you would draw them, like, oh, I know who that is now. Like it was a chance to inform more, and I knew vaguely it's this, it's that, and then but that's a posture and a haircut and a style, and suddenly like, oh, I know exactly who that
Yeah,
is. I
yeah,
know,
yeah. It's I'm trying to.
I know her perfume.
Yeah,
I know it's in her
yeah,
pockets.
yeah. No, it's fun. It's making them an interesting person. Is how do you do that? What about this person? What is their interests? What are they, when they're not doing this or doing this? What else are they doing? And a lot of that's in the script,
Yeah.
because that's there, and then there's enough stuff there, and then if it's like, if I spin off of those, all of a sudden we've doubled and tripled who they are and their interests are, and their realness, believability as a character. And yeah, it gives when you find those things, it gives you attitudes they give them, and why they react, how they react, and to what they see and what they wear, what shoes they're wearing. That's all fun. It builds upon itself.
Yeah, Rita is like a great example. Like she's the EMT, and she's clearly the one who's most familiar with the gym. She looks tough. She looks big. She's confident and brash, and kind of Kool-Aid mans her way through the family and all that kind of stuff. So a chance to do like, oh, now what if she's an EMT on a bad streak of luck, right? And what does it mean for someone to be all chin and shoulders with her family, and then in the back of the truck, terrified that they're going to get another 911 call because she's just kept losing people. Like, just to put that emotional burden on a character that visually plays against it. Anytime I think, it's you can spin something against the way it drives is good. It's good to try. It's good to go for.
Well, it's always good to go for it. I don't think I would call it obsession, but there is a repetition. As a numbers guy, my dad was a math computer science teacher, so he taught me to see math as a language from a very, very young age. So I tend to pay attention to numbers. So there's lots of sevens, 7 heroes, 7 sisters, 7 villains. Without giving anything away, significance of 7.
It's a magnificent number. It felt right, and it was one of those things that I didn't question. It was the size of the original crew, and then it sort of became like that was appropriate as I was kind of building out what are the archetypes that felt like a solid number, and then we had a
Right.
pattern, and it became about like okay, so if there's 7 good guys, there's 7 bad guys, and anytime we have a thing, it's got to be 7. Terry, I'm sorry, it couldn't have been 3.
That's okay.
But
Diversity. I like it.
yeah, and yeah, sure. No, there's 7 fighting houses. Great. What does that look like? And it demands that it can't just be like, you can't hand wave it. If there's going to be 7, it can't just be, oh, we're 7 fighting families. It's going to be another 7 fighting styles, and so there's half a day spent studying up on all the different kind of fighting styles around the world, and making that list and making that map. And now I know one day I'm going to need that guy on a boat who can kick somebody, and we got it covered.
It's cool to be able to use that 7-pointed star too, just visually. I mean, just because people see that and they see one thing and they start looking, they go, "Oh, it's got 7 points. What is that?" I mean, just something as subtle as that, how that messes with people's minds or their preconceptions of what they think they're seeing, and then they start looking, they go, "What does that mean?" And so,
and the heptagram and all that.
It's a great. I mean, I love playing with symbols and stuff in the story. So when Matt wrote that in, I was like, "Oh, well, I had to figure out how to draw it." So that was the trick. Getting that one figured out. But once I get that figured out, I was like, "This. I want to use this everywhere in the story, because It's such a commanding. Uh, it's so rare to see it, and yet it invokes so much other stuff. And so it's like, how do I, where else can I use this during the story? And so that was fun. I just use it all the time in those 2 issues of Ghost Lights, because it's just um,
All over.
it's great. It's that kind of thing. It's latching on to those little details that you find that it's like, oh, this works for, and that's just that's world building, I guess.
Yeah.
Storytelling, world building. It just gives that next layer of depth, especially because the reader's mind fills in a lot of those gaps too. So
You mentioned Jung. It's something about that, about like, where did it, I don't know, that just came out, so I'm pot committed now. I'm not gonna question
Commit
it,
to the bit.
like, yeah, and I just made the bit up. All right, shit, well, this is the bit we're committed to.
yeah.
I don't know where it came from, but this is the thing, and I'm gonna trust it and build into it, and use that as a kind of guiding principle or whatever.
I mean, for layout junkies like myself, it's blissful. So thank you both for that. And I've been listening to Rick Rubin's new book, The Creative Act, A Way of Being, which is fantastic stuff. Highly recommend that. He talks about the best art, the most authentic stuff, coming from a place first and foremost serving what the creators want to do and not the viewer, the listener, etc. This feels like the epitome of that, and I think why it feels special to me. You both worked in the superhero grind of pumping out monthly books, and most comics people who are trying to make a living doing it functioning off of let's knock it out, on to the next thing without much time for reflection, sort of out of necessity. What makes this project so special to you both?
Exactly that. And that was, that was the day I became a writer. It was the day I stopped wondering about what it would be like to write and just wrote, right? And the first thing I ever was writing that somebody else was publishing and paying money to publish, like I was completely paralyzed because it wasn't Love and Rockets. It wasn't From Hell. And there's a line in the Tim Burton movie Ed Wood, where Ed's trying to bluff his way into a meeting with the producer. He's like, "This is Edward D. Wood Jr., director of Glenna Glenda." And the guy's like, "This is the biggest piece of shit I ever saw." And his response is, "Well, my next one will be better." And that's what I'm here to talk about. And just that, like, oh, my next one will be better, right? So like the worst day in comics is Wednesday. It's the day that all your mistakes get made permanent. The best thing I ever wrote was the thing I just finished. The worst thing I ever wrote is the thing that just came out. But it's that regular, it's got to happen, it's got to happen, it's got to happen. But the luxury to me about a book like Adventureman is it combines that. I mean, I have the roadmap, I have the big dots on the map, but there's a lot of space in between. And I might think these dots are closer, and it turns out they're farther apart. But I know I'm going to go from this dot to this dot. And I thought it was going to be like this, but it turns out like that. But so much of it is committing to the bit, is trusting my instinct, and like, oh, no, this scene needs to be a little bit longer. Or she just said a thing, and that's interesting, and we're going to follow that for a second or whatever. And knowing that, trusting that we've been doing this enough that I'll be able to get from this point to this point. And whatever the instinct is, whatever the charge is, whatever the thing is to follow, like, no, I'm going to follow that. I don't, something about a Montessori-esque school letting the kids rewrite A Christmas Carol killed me. It just like, well, if it's a ghost, it should be spooky. And what if I had a gun? And like, yeah, great. Let's just, as a runner, have this insane Christmas play that everybody has to go see. I don't know where it came from, but it felt like, oh, it's Christmas. It felt appropriate, right? It felt like, oh, this is a story about ghosts. Christmas stories are ghost stories, right? And it all sort of thematically worked. But at the time, it was just, I don't know where it came from. I don't know why it was there, but it let us build the world more and give it more texture and tooth. And I trust that the next one will be better. And I really do know where I'm going, even if I don't know how I'm going to get there. I'm going to figure it out. And that's the fun. That's the challenge. That's the risk. And, and I will always, I've said, I'm like a broken record on this, but every time it's time to start up again, I think that's it. I'm toast. I don't know how I got here. I don't know where I'm going. The ship has run aground. I have no ideas. I've blown it. Adventureman is done. And then I will finish an issue and then immediately say to Terry, this is the most fun I've ever had. This run, I wrote 1, 2, 3 back to back to back. Like, it was just so much fun. I just did 3 in a row because I just didn't want to leave. And that every time I feel like, oh, that's it, we're out of moves, then I sit down and look at where we've gone. I'm like, oh no, wait, there's a million moves here. What if you this? What is that? It's a way of, like I said, writing checks to yourself in the future that you're going to cash on a broke day.
Yeah.
Terry,
Yeah.
what about
No,
you?
yeah. No, I think somewhere in there, Matt said something that made me think that we can tell this story and work on this book because whatever influences in our life or in our past we can throw in here. Because it's a creator-owned book. There aren't those restrictions on us that we can't do that because in 5 years ago these other creators did this already. We can't do that, or these other characters are using this character. Those things are out the window. So it's up to if we see something that strikes us as interesting, we can put this in here because, um, well, obviously we aren't just throwing anything in there. It still has to fit in the world, but it definitely is the appeal of doing something like this, is that when something strikes my fancy, it's like, I want to use this. Oh yes, I will just kind of bookmark this or remember that I'll come back to this and use this in Adventureman or whatever I'm using it in. And this book I've been able to do so many influences or things I wanted to play with have been in this book. And the next issues that are coming out, we're just like, it's kind of almost tip of the iceberg. It's like, as much as I've done, it's like there's still all these things we still haven't played with and we still want to play with, or they will. But when I play with this one thing, how does it affect this other thing? And then if you combine those things, then it just kind of keeps growing that way, which is it's pretty cool. I mean, that's I guess that's creating the storytelling. That's the point of it all.
And I mean, I think it's great if something finds popular success, but I don't know how to write for it. There's that LCD Sound System song, "You Wanted a Hit." We don't really do hits. Like, all I know how to do is what I do, and that's whatever is interesting to me at the moment. And if people are into it, great. And if not, okay. But I don't know how to write for applause. So I'm writing, like I said, the book, the Ultimate Dodson's book, as best I can manage. And I hope everybody else loves it as much as I do. And it's really gratifying when it turns out, it's people are into it. It's great.
Is that artistic maturity? Because there's a few books coming out right now where the team has a crystal clear idea with respect to the intent mixed with the career maturity to say, this is the book we want to make, and have the chops and confidence to pull it off. And I'm thinking of like Matt Wagner and Kelly Jones kind of pivoting to the crowdfunding market and doing their Dracula thing right now.
I don't know. I mean, I would hate to speak for anybody else, but I just knew very early on that, like, I like, if I could be Mark Miller or Jeff Loeb or whatever, I would. Like, it'd be great. You wouldn't have to. There'd be so many things you wouldn't have to worry about necessarily that I worry about all the time. But like, it's just out of my control, and I can't work in that idiom. And I've tried, and sometimes it's been successful, and sometimes it hasn't been successful. It's never been for not wanting to make it work. I just don't know how to do it. I don't know if it's maturity or recklessness on my part, as I've never. I mean, I've said no in comics far more than I've said yes, because I knew I didn't have it. I didn't have the thing. I didn't, and not everything is successful, but every book that I've ever written, I've thought I would buy this. This is a thing as a reader I want to check out, right? Like I said, they don't always work, but that's always the impetus. It's like, would I read this? And if the answer is no, probably not, then I don't do it.
Yeah, you have to be at this point, and to want to sit all day and at your board by yourself and create these things. You have to be interested. You have to be inspired by it. So for me, it's a matter of finding projects that make me want to do this. Because it's a lot of time, a lot of work, but if I'm happy doing it, there's really nothing else I want to be doing. So it's finding projects that allow me to do this kind of thing, because when it goes well, it's very satisfying. And that's why I'm mostly interior wise doing creator owned work now, because I basically have drawn everything at least once, maybe twice in mainstream comics now for all the companies. So the impetus to do another company project is fairly low compared to something that's never been done before, because that's the option. Yep. It's like, I've done something I've done before, and after years I can come back and do a new spin and feel like I'm better now on something that I've done before. But the fact that with creator owned, where we are, it's you're creating from scratch, and you're creating something that you love, or you or Matt and I love. These things that we really enjoy, and it's like, oh, I wish there was a book that had this in it, and that as comic creators, we have that. There's no giant corporation that we're trying to, or a group of stockholders are trying to appease with these ideas. If we have the idea, we both agree on it. That's it. We go. it's after all these years of working all the different in all the different art related fields, I always come back to comics because there's no barrier between you and the reader. Basically, there isn't that level of costs and people you have to go through. Basically, if you have an idea, you can put it in front of anybody. And I love that about comics. So it's like this, such a pure art form in that way, like a storytelling art form, I guess.
Yeah. Well, just don't stop making it, please. And
yeah, no, it's too much fun.
Well, Adventureman Family Tree hit shelves on March 19th. We are after FOC, so call your shops, make sure to ask them to pull it for you. And if you're new to the series, grab the hardcover editions. The back matter goes into some deeper process stuff that I could keep Carrie here all day long, asking him about.
And they're huge. They're huge and they're gorgeous.
Yes.
Look.
Yes.
They're gorgeous.
They are amazing. And like 600 DPI in scans and proper threshold amounts to apply, right? When rendering.
Yeah.
Matt would probably get bored with all this discussion. So we'll leave that there.
No, please.
He's not bored. He's not bored. I don't want to keep you all afternoon. But Terry, what else are you working on right now? Is there any news on the Manchurian?
Actually, I will be seeing Pornsak in Seattle this weekend, and we'll talk about what is going on. The collection for the Horizon experiment. I think the final order on that collection is next week. So that'll be out in a couple months. I think maybe it's April. It's out. But we'll be talking this weekend and seeing if we're going to be doing more. And then I'm the cover artist on Gotham City Sirens, Fire and Ice, the James Straczynski line of books at Marvel right now. So those are my 3 cover assignments. So that keeps me busy. Between that and Adventureman, like I get to scratch all my itches on on the mainstream stuff of that, and then the kind of artistic pure pleasure on Adventureman.
Well, Matt, speaking of mainstream, I think the secret's out. You were taking over Batman duties this fall with Jorge Jimenez, stepping into Jeff and Jim's shoes. It was the first comic you ever read, I believe. So how are you feeling right now?
I feel like I've just tricked a bunch of people into paying me to think about Batman. Joke's on them. I've been doing it my whole life for free. So it's a blast. It's a blast. It's a blast. It's a blast.
Well, we'll be anxiously awaiting that in September. Terry and Matt, thanks for hanging out with me today on the show. It's been a lot of fun.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Man.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Sure, absolutely. This is Brian O'Neill, and on behalf of all of us at Comic Book Yeti, thanks for tuning in. We will see you next time. Take care, everybody.